Happy Halloween! Or Happy All Hallows Eve! Or, well, okay, fine. Happy Eve of All Saints' Day. Because we're Christians and we don't have fun on Halloween. Okay, well, we'll get back to that. Um, it is October 31st, at least, well, it will be when this video is posted on the blog. It will probably be up earlier in the week than that, but oh well. If you're watching this early, shame on you, I guess. This is a brief homily I wanted to put together for Halloween, for All Saints' Eve, October 31st, evening prayer. In our 2019 prayer book, we have the daily lectionary, which brings us to Mark chapter 10 on the evening before All Saints' Day. Now, this is part of what's called Lectio Continuo, continual reading. So it's just continuing through the Gospel according to St. Mark, day by day. So this is not a reading specially appointed for All Saints' Eve specifically. Any relationship that this passage has with the holiday and commemoration is purely coincidental. That being said, part of this reading in Mark chapter 10 is indeed pertinent to this holiday coming up tomorrow. So let's take a look. In Mark chapter 10, starting at verse 32, we have one of Jesus's predictions of his death. He does this 3 times in the Gospel according to Mark, and how those various moments are explained in Mark versus the other Gospels varies a little bit. This is one where he predicts his death. The apostles or disciples are dismayed again, and so they come back with a new question. James and John particularly, and their mother, asking, "Hey, when you come into your kingdom, how about having James and John on your right and left hands?" Because moms want the best for their kids. No, it's true, they do. But what's happening here, as you probably know, is that they're sort of vying for power. They want to be Jesus's heirs, basically, because they're beginning to believe that maybe he actually is going to die, and we're going to have to carry on this cause, this new movement, this revolution of the faith of God. So, all right, can we be in charge? Can we lead it? Is basically what the question is, which is why the other disciples are particularly peeved at them. And so Jesus responds, if you read through to verse 45, with this bit of rebuke. Like, are you going to drink the cup that I drink? And are you able to go through all this? And they think so. And he says, okay, well, you will share in my suffering. And then he goes on to teach about suffering as following in his footsteps. And, he has a few different things to say there about not being greater than one's master, and that basically all of our prosperity instincts in this world are inverted. Blessing does not mean that you're going to be rich, successful, live a long life. To suffer for the name of Christ is a blessing, and to die for the name of Christ even is glorious. Not that should be everyone's goal, to die for the name of Christ. To be, one of my history professors once upon a time described some of this mistaken mentality as people who were determined to be martyred or to die trying. So I'll let you laugh at that wonderful sense of humor right there. But anyway, regardless of desire, there is that reality that Jesus sets forward there, that to follow in his footsteps and share in his suffering and even his death is not a sign of curse, not a sign of failure, but actually a glorious thing to follow in his footsteps so closely and faithfully. So this begins to tie in to the theme of All Saints' Day as we prepare for this great holiday, one of the great principal feasts of the year. And it is actually traditional to reflect and read on some of the stories of the saints, so to speak, in especially the Old Testament, as we look through the people that have gone before and have suffered for the faith and been persecuted for their faithfulness. One of the classic stories, which might show up at a All Saints vigil, so to speak, is from 2 Maccabees chapter 7, which, if you're following the daily lectionary, you will have read last week. Last week. And in chapter 7, it's just this long, painful story of a mother and her 7 sons, one by one, tortured. And, just all you have to do is eat pork, which is, unclean in the Old Covenant. Just eat some pork and we'll let you go. And they all say, no, we will die for the law of God. And we will not, forsake our beliefs. We will not forsake our God, who has saved us and will vindicate us at the resurrection. So one by one, they're tortured and killed, and the mother as well at the end. So it's sort of a gruesome story because it talks about the different yucky things that they do to torture them. But it's like the crucifixion. It's a horrible way to suffer and die, and this is done for the sake of truth, for the sake of God's plan to save the world from sin and death. So stories like that are begin to find some meaning and further meaning and explanation in teachings like this from Jesus in chapter 10 of Mark's Gospel. However many of these stories of suffering and faithfulness, confessing the faith in the face of persecutors and slanderers, it all comes to its fruition or explanation, really, in the book of Hebrews. The end of chapter 11 and the beginning of chapter 12. This actually will be a special reading in morning prayer tomorrow, All Saints' Day, in morning prayer. So that is a particular All Saints' Day reading, and I believe it's often one of the... I don't know. Anyway, it's a traditional reading associated with this day and is appropriate for other particular saints' days as well. So the idea there is, just looking back at the Old Testament heroes of the faith. All these people have undergone trials and sufferings and persecutions, and some of the references that is made at the end of chapter 11 suggest that the Maccabean story is one of the ones in mind, because there was some pretty horrific suffering during that period. And all this, it comes down to the beginning of chapter 12, where this is all about following the faithful path of Christ. He has gone before us, he has suffered and died, and we are surrounded by this cloud of witnesses, and they point us to Jesus. That is why we celebrate the saints who have gone before us, because elements of their lives or their teaching or their deaths, or all of the above, point us to Christ. They give us real-world examples of how people, Christians, or pre-Christians, looking at the Old Testament, were faithful to God, and how the Christ-likeness which the Holy Spirit engenders in God's people bore fruit, either in their lives or in their death, or both. So in faith we're told there in Hebrews 12, in faith to cast aside the distractions and to focus on and to pursue Jesus. There we find our role model, there we find our guide, our direction, and our goal. So we despise the shame of suffering for Christ. When you are persecuted, slandered, made fun of, beaten, imprisoned, tortured, because you believe in Jesus, you are sharing in the sufferings of Christ. Now, sure, this doesn't mean that all suffering is therefore inherently good. If you're poor and starving, that's we're not going to say, oh, good for you, you're poor and starving, now you're like Jesus. No, we feed people like that. But when people are being persecuted because they believe in Jesus, not because they're being jerks about it, which sometimes people make mistakes about, but simply for believing in Jesus, which we do see in several parts of the world to this day, then we are to count that a blessing, to be sharing in the glory of Christ in his suffering on the cross. Just go back to the Gospel of John and revisit how the subject of the cross is always approached with a sense of glory. This is Christ's victory, and in our sharing in his sufferings, we share in his victory also. So it's a complete inversion of the prosperity instinct that worldly thinking tends towards, and that the prosperity gospel, the health wealth gospel, all that nonsense also tries to bring into the Christian faith. So we can despise the shame of suffering, and we can also therefore despise the power of darkness in Halloween as we portray the defeat of Satan, the defeat of the evil spiritual world by Christ. The light of Christ shines brighter than any darkness, a light no darkness can quench, as we say in the Easter Vigil liturgy. So I don't mean that Christians need to despise Halloween, like, oh, this is a terrible, stupid holiday, it's demonic and all this crap, blah, blah, blah. There are people who take that approach, and if you can't handle it, well, power to you, I guess. But there is something very appropriate about dressing up as children, dressing up as ghosts and scary things, because we're kind of making light of death, making light of evil, not making light of evil, but making light of the power of evil. Ghosts, demons, these things, to the extent that they're real, are no longer scary to us. We know the one who has conquered them. So yes, the devil is real and threatening, and yes, demons are real and up to no good, but we know the one who has beaten them and will ultimately judge them forever. So we have be careful and don't mess around with the demonic, but we don't have to be afraid of them, and we can proclaim a victory over them of sorts in the celebration of dressing up as costumes, because we can make light of it, because the light of Christ has overcome the darkness. So happy Halloween, because Christ is King, and he has vindicated and will vindicate all his saints.